Have you ever heard of a government killing its own citizens? On purpose? Not in war, not in battle, but in secret on American soil and without a single bullet fired. Welcome to Arcane History Hub, where we explore the darkest corners of forgotten history. If you're drawn to stories the textbooks skipped, stick with us. Because today, we're unraveling a chilling chapter from the Prohibition era, a time when the United States government knowingly poisoned its own people, all in the name of morality. This is the story of how, during the 1920s, the U.S. government added deadly chemicals to alcohol, fully aware that people would drink it, and fully prepared to accept the body count. Let's start at the beginning. In January 1920, the United States enacted the 18th Amendment, launching the infamous Prohibition era. Alcohol was now illegal. The production, sale, and transport of intoxicating liquors were banned. The goal? To curb crime, promote public morality, and build a healthier, more disciplined society. But almost immediately, the plan backfired. Rather than eliminating alcohol consumption, Prohibition drove it underground. Speakeasies, secret bars hidden in basements, back rooms, and alleyways exploded in popularity. Bootlegging, the illegal production and sale of alcohol, became a booming business. Gangsters like Al Capone built empires off the nation's thirst. Police forces were overwhelmed. Corruption ran rampant. And perhaps most ironically, people drank more than ever. Faced with failure, the government grew desperate. It couldn't stop people from drinking, so it decided to make drinking deadly. Here's how they did it. During Prohibition, thousands of Americans turned to industrial alcohol. This was alcohol made for factories, not for drinking, used in cleaning supplies, solvents, fuels, and pharmaceuticals. But bootleggers quickly learned how to renature or redistill this industrial alcohol to make it drinkable again. It was cheaper, widely available, and relatively easy to process. In response, the U.S. government issued an order, Make Industrial Alcohol Toxic. In 1926, the Treasury Department mandated that manufacturers add methyl alcohol, also known as wood alcohol, to industrial alcohol supplies. Methyl alcohol is extremely poisonous. It can cause blindness. It can destroy your nervous system, and in sufficient doses, it kills. Government officials knew this. In fact, that was the point. The logic was chilling. If enough people died from drinking poisoned alcohol, others would stop trying. The government believed fear was the ultimate deterrent. This became known unofficially as the Chemists' War. The New York medical examiner at the time, Charles Norris, was horrified. In December 1926, he went public. He reported that over 400 people had died that year in New York City alone from poisoned alcohol. He accused the government of legalized murder. In his words, the government knows it is not stopping drinking by putting poison in alcohol. Yet it continues its poisoning program. Knowing this, it must be held responsible for the deaths that result. But the government didn't stop. In fact, it doubled down. By 1927, the poisoning formula had become more aggressive. Beyond methyl alcohol, ingredients like benzene, kerosene, chloroform, and even formaldehyde were added. These were not mere deterrents, they were chemical weapons. That year, over 700 people died from tainted alcohol in New York City alone. Nationally, estimates vary, but most historians agree that by the time Prohibition ended, more than 10,000 Americans had died from poisoned alcohol. Let that sink in. More than 10,000 people. Not from war, not from crime, but from a policy signed off by elected officials, knowing full well it would kill innocent civilians. How did this happen in a democratic nation? To understand that, we have to examine the social and moral climate of the 1920s. The Prohibition movement had strong backing from religious groups, especially the powerful Anti-Saloon League. These groups viewed alcohol as a moral disease, one that destroyed families, fueled crime, and offended God. To many, drinkers weren't just people with a vice, they were sinners. And some began to believe that if a sinner died drinking poisoned liquor, well, maybe they got what they deserve. This moral absolutism created a dangerous mindset that the ends, a sober, God-fearing nation, justified the means, even if those means included mass death. Of course, not everyone agreed. Medical professionals were outraged. Journalists condemned the policy. But the government remained silent. And the victims? They were mostly the poor, the working class, immigrants, people who couldn't afford safe, smuggled liquor, and instead turned to cheap, street-made alcohol. They died in tenements, in alleyways, and backroom bars. Often, no one was held accountable. There were survivors, too, but many were left permanently disabled. Thousands went blind. Others suffered brain damage, nerve damage, or organ failure. Still, the poisoning continued, and all the while the bootleggers adapted. Chemists on the black market developed new ways to reverse engineer poisoned alcohol. Speakeasies hired their own chemists to test batches. In some cities, criminal labs rivaled those of universities. It became a deadly arms race between government poisoners and underworld purifiers. Then came the media backlash. By 1928, major newspapers began exposing the policy. Articles questioned how a government claiming to protect its people could deliberately implement a policy that killed them. Public opinion began to shift. Even some members of Congress distanced themselves from the program. Still, the policy remained in place, but the writing was on the wall. By the early 1930s, support for Prohibition had crumbled. Crime had skyrocketed. Enforcement was inconsistent, and the economic toll of the Great Depression pushed many to demand legalization and taxation of alcohol. In December 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed Prohibition. Alcohol was once again legal. The government quietly stopped poisoning industrial alcohol, but there were no apologies, no memorials, no reckoning, just silence. The deaths were chalked up to unfortunate consequences of an imperfect policy. History moved on. And most Americans never learned that for nearly a decade, their own government ran a chemical warfare campaign against its own people. It's a story few history books tell, but it happened, and it raises haunting questions about how far a government will go when it believes it's doing the right thing. So the next time someone tells you history is boring, remind them that once in the land of the free, drinking a glass of gin could be a death sentence. And someone in Washington made that call. If this story left you stunned, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more dark, hidden chapters from the past, only on Arcane History Hub. Until next time, stay curious.